What's the crack, everyone? It's Nathan here, aka the Rambling Kern, and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So once again, apologies for the delay in videos. I've had a lot of unforeseen things come up, and as a result I've not really been able to get around the videos, and I've had to put a lot of things on delay, and a lot of projects I had for the summer unfortunately have had to be shelved. So apologies for that, but I am back making videos. You will be seeing more regular videos from me. I am potentially going to be working on a second channel as well, so if you're interested, stay tuned for that. Now this video is going to be kind of an interesting topic, and it's one that I see come up a lot, especially for people who are either new to martial arts, or some people, let's say, who are long-term traditional martial artists. And I'll kind of touch on what I mean by that in a bit. But if you're interested in martial arts and you're interested in lessons, if you're interested in finding out more, obviously subscribe to the channel. I do run classes in Irish martial arts, so you will find links to all that stuff down below. Now, this video kind of came about through a few different things. And one thing that really touched on this topic very well was a recent video by Jesse Enkamp. So anyone who is familiar with him, you'll know the guy I'm talking about. For the rest of you, he is a martial arts YouTuber, a long-term karate practitioner, very, very skilled guy. Really interesting videos. Some of them I tend to disagree with, one or two of them, but generally really good stuff, really good information. He had a recent video where he was learning from Francis Ngannou, former UFC heavyweight champ, his coach. And the topic came up around traditional martial artists and the kind of differences between a traditional martial art and a combat sport, or a combat focused martial art. Now, I've heard this saying before, but I thought it was very well surmised in this chat, that often when we look at a traditional art, it is process driven, whereas a combat sport tends to be outcome driven. And I want to touch on that in relation to like the bigger picture of combat, because I think people kind of confuse this, and especially outsiders or people who just aren't that familiar with martial arts tend to look at certain martial arts, and especially combat focused things, and I'll touch on what I mean by that in a minute, and tend to look at them and think, oh, that's really ugly, or there's no real skill there, or that's just people trying to bash each other's head in, or similar kind of lines get said. This actually comes up a lot with the sort of stick sparring I do, especially when I train with the Dog Brothers. So I have trained with them, gone to various different events with them. Absolutely wonderful people. Really highly recommend anyone who's interested in stick-based martial arts of any type to go check out their work and go try to go to some of their workshops or events. Really can't recommend it enough. My own group and myself, one of my students, are back from the European Gathering, which was last month. Had a wonderful time, got to train with some really great people, had some really wonderful fights with people. But often people look at that and go, well, that's really like ugly, there's no skill there, they're just bashing each other with sticks. That's not martial arts, they don't know what to do and there's no skill there. And frankly, they're wrong. And I'll kind of touch on the why of that. So that saying of one is process driven in a traditional martial art and more a combat focused or combat sport tends to be more outcome driven. I think that is a very simple way of explaining it, but there's kind of some nuances that I think really add to this. So one of the things I see a lot in traditional arts is the want to make things look aesthetically pleasing. And that makes total sense, especially when your focus is to not win against another opponent. Your focus, more often than not, is to make your art look good. Striking poses, crisp, clean lines, and throwing punches in a very particular way. And that actually comes up in that Jesse Enkamp video, where he's throwing a punch and kind of leaving it out there because that's how he's been taught in karate, to make those punches look crisp. Now, I did karate for a few years when I was in my early teens, and one thing that you see in a lot of traditional martial arts is kata, and I kind of use this as an example of the differences you'll see in more traditional focused arts and more combat focused arts is sequences like kata are often quite a useful tool to remember steps or to remember like specific ways to do moves. However, my issue is not actually in the kata themselves, it's in the lack of breakdown in the kata. So what I mean is, if anyone's ever studied boxing, you could spend a month just learning how to throw a jab, just over and over, just throwing a jab, getting that skill down. Whereas in a kata, you might have 10 to 20 or 30 different movements. There's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, it's a good tool for remembering those sequences. But if you've done boxing, the likelihood of landing a 10 punch combo is incredibly slim. And if we transfer that to a sport with even kind of less rules as such, like MMA, the chances of landing a 10, any movement, punch, kick, whatever combination, is also very, very slim. And this is something that gets quite interesting because the more rules that are in place, the more the likelihood of something looking like a martial art and looking aesthetically pleasing. So the example I give would be, again, boxing. You have some incredible boxers out there who just move like poetry in motion. And then people look at something like MMA, where you have a lot of clinch work, and then they go, oh, that's really not that aesthetically pleasing. I don't like this. What's going on? And obviously, if you don't train in grappling, you'll kind of look at clinch work or groundwork. That's the classic one, and you will see UFC fights or other MMA promotions where people boo groundwork because they don't really know what they're looking at. And sometimes it is often used as a tool to stall and slow down the fight and for fighters to catch their breath. But sometimes a fighter might have put a lot of work to get there and he's trying to do something and the crowd's booing and it can have an influence on the fight. Now, what I'm kind of getting at here is the less rules, the more opportunity a fighter has to do different things. So in boxing, for example, you can't really clinch. In older styles of boxing, or even like 40 odd years ago, you used to see a lot more clinch work, and now with kind of outside influences, especially from like Olympic boxing, you really don't see the same level of clinch work, and there's not really anywhere near the same level of focus. So people will use that as a tactic to just slow it down, reset, and go again. Now, with that, you have this rule set that wants a specific outcome. They want to see someone knocked out. So that is the goal for boxing. Whereas in a traditional art, like I said, it's the process. People want to show their skill and they want to show that they can do their moves in a particular framework and make it look aesthetically pleasing to outsiders. And that is often the big difference that we see with it. But if we look at like combat, and what I mean by combat is arts where potentially, someone might lose their life. So if we look at fencing, for example, fencing looks very sloppy when less rules are involved. So again, this is coming back to the same thing. Rules really do define the direction an art goes in. And I'll talk about a kind of classic example that's close to my heart in a minute. But if we look at fencing, if you allow grappling, it becomes very, very different. So if anyone who follows my channel is familiar with them, you have probably seen Dequitems, I believe is the channel's name. Now I'm going to put that up on screen so you know who it is, and put up a few screenshots. Their work is fantastic. They do kind of unscripted, full contact fights in full armor. And the fights do tend to, and this is not a critique on them in any means, I absolutely love their work, it's incredible. But the fights do tend to look a little bit sloppy and a little bit, unaesthetically pleasing. But that is the truth of a fight, because you don't know what the other person is going to do, so you don't have that perfect instant reaction. You don't have the block into the reverse punch or whatever thing that you've drilled in your traditional martial arts class. You don't know what's going to happen, and especially when you have grappling involved, you might throw something out there, they might grab hold of it, and now we're into this kind of back and forth tussle. And if you're not familiar with grappling, it's not really going to look very aesthetically pleasing. Now, this is something I talk about a lot, and I might do a video on it if people are interested, but I find the biggest difference in many martial arts in the modern world is the rule sets that they're based around. So the classic example I like to give, because I do both, is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. Now essentially Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for those who aren't familiar, started basically as Judo. And over the years, the rules have kind of diverged into two very different arts, and we have two arts that are kind of known for very specific things. Judo has groundwork and it has stand-up work, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has stand-up and groundwork, but they're kind of on the exact polar opposites of each other, because the rule sets for Judo really focus on stand-up, and the rule sets for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really focus on groundwork. Now, as a result of the rules, the two arts look very different. And in a lot of ways, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tends to have slightly less rules. And as a result, a lot of people find it looks a little bit sloppy, especially because certain things aren't rewarded. So, for example, stand-ups and throws and takedowns aren't really heavily rewarded, so people tend to not focus on them. And as a result, you get an art that's, gone in a specific direction because that's what the rules promote. When we look at combat, and I'm going to bring up various different paintings and artworks and drawings and woodcuts. When we look at artwork of combat, be it like brawls historically, or fights, riots, or wars, you will see generally the artist portrays it as very chaotic, because that's what a fight is, especially when there's no rules. And even if you look at fencing manuals, you will see these kind of stylized photos and stylized pictures, these kind of snapshots in time of what a fight should look like. And I think that's kind of where some of the confusion comes from. Because often people see a fight, and especially like a sword fight, and they expect it to be like a samurai movie where there's like the one perfect cut and the guy, blood spurts from his neck and he slumps to the floor. More often than not, fights don't really go that way. And especially if we look at historical examples, and I've discussed some, where two fighters end up like stabbing each other, and then it goes to a very, violent exchange back and forth, often resulting in grappling of some sort, and then ending up on the ground, and other secondary weapons coming out. Actual combat tends to not be very aesthetically pleasing, because you're trying to do whatever you can to win, and especially when you have less rules, you have less likelihood to be able to land the thing that you have trained, because the other person is going to do the thing that they feel you're less skilled at. So the classic example in MMA is you have someone who is a good striker but a poor wrestler, and then you have the other person who is an okay striker and a good wrestler. They're just going to try wrestle all day long. That is really where we see, like I was saying at the very beginning, an outcome-based art go in a specific direction and a process-based art go in another direction. And when we look at the martial arts that we train, often when we see sparring, we look at it and go, oh, that looks very sloppy and that doesn't look particularly interesting. I've seen this happen a lot with grappling videos on YouTube. Often you'll see people, especially when it comes to different types of grappling, they see a throw, for example, and they go, oh, that just looks like really sloppy, a really bad judo. If you look at even judo at the high level, it tends to look like somewhat sloppy judo, because they're trying to game the system and use the rules to get penalties and win in whatever means they can. So we have an image in our head of how a fight should look, but realistically often doesn't look like that at all. And when we talk about actual life and death situations, it tends to look very brutal and not really that impressive. Now, if we take things in isolation and take out snapshots, yes, those things can look spectacular, and often you'll see photos that kind of highlight that. But I thought this just a really interesting topic, and one that has come up so many times. I've had people say it about stick fighting sparring that I've put up, as well as numerous different groups who I've been part of or trained with. And people really get focused on like, oh, this doesn't look, aesthetically great or whatever. But often fights won't. And just to kind of touch back on my whole point around combinations and katas and stuff. Katas I find great in some ways, but like I said, if you don't break down the individual components, often you're not going to get these kind of really intriguing ideas of like, what could I do with this, or what is the actual purpose of this move. And I know there's a whole discipline within karate, I believe it's called bunkai, someone correct me on that if you know, where basically they break down those things. I try to do that in all the different arts I do, and start break down into the core components of why those things, what is the outcome, which again points us in a different direction sometimes. Like I said, I'm going to leave links to JC Encamp's channel and to Dequitems' channel. Really highly suggest you check out both. They're fantastic. It is super hot in my recording room at the moment, so I'm probably sweating away here, but uncharacteristically warm for Ireland at the moment, but now you know why. And thank you guys really for all the support. We're almost at 4,000 subscribers, so if you haven't, please do subscribe. It really does mean a lot to me. Like I said, the channel's coming back to regular videos now. If you guys have suggestions or videos you'd like to see, please do let me know. If you're more interested in these kind of talking head videos around martial arts, let me know. I do have a lot of experience in various different martial arts, and you know, if you guys are interested in hearing about that and hearing me discuss those things, or even kind of current events in the martial arts world, I'm more than happy to talk about that too. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for the support. Like I said, it's been a really crazy kind of few months for me, and the support and the growth of this channel really does mean a lot, and gives me a lot of strength to kind of keep going and keep doing this stuff. So I really do appreciate everything that you guys do, even if it's just a comment or a like on a video. Thank you so much for watching, and salam.